Be dispensed with.
Without objection.
Mr. President, last weekend, the New York Times ran a story entitled, "How a Drug Company Made $114 billion by Gaming the U.S. Patent System." This is an infuriating account of how a pharmaceutical company maintained a monopoly on a popular drug and the impact it's had on patients and taxpayers. The company is AbbVie, and the drug is Humira, one of the most widely prescribed drugs in the world. It's an anti-inflammatory medication that's commonly used to treat arthritis and other conditions. Despite the fact that Humira has been available for 2 decades, its first competitor didn't hit the market until earlier this year. That wasn't due to a lack of interest by other companies or an inability to produce the biosimilar that could earn Food and Drug Administration approval. It was because AbbVie used a maze of overlapping patents and an aggressive litigation strategy to stave off any competition. Unsurprisingly, this led to big earnings for the company, $114 billion in revenue since 2016. And it's come at a high cost to patients who rely on this drug to maintain their health. The list price for Humira is more than $80,000 per year, per patient. That's higher than the median household in Texas. Household income in Texas. So depending on the patient's insurance, that price could be lowered significantly for the consumer or the patient themselves. A woman in Kentucky said her employer's health insurance plan kept her payments around $60 a year. But of course, we know that if the insurance company is paying retail or some negotiated price, that ultimately that price is going to be passed along in terms of higher insurance premiums for the consumer. So there's a lot of bait and switch going on here. Once she retired and switched to Medicare, the cost skyrocketed to $8,000 a year. So her private insurance kept her payments to $60 a year, but when she changed to Medicare, it went to $8,000 a year. This is, again, part of the shell game in healthcare and in pharmaceuticals. I can't imagine anyone living on a fixed income that could afford such an expensive drug. The good news, at least for this specific drug, is that at long last, Humira's monopoly has come to an end. Earlier this week, the first biosimilar came to market, and more are expected later this year. Humira is one of the most egregious examples of patent abuse, but it's far from the only one. Other pharmaceutical companies are engaging in this practice every day, and there's nothing to prevent them from using the same playbook. I hope that will change soon. Earlier this week, Senator Blumenthal, the senator from Connecticut, and I reintroduced a bill called the Affordable Prescriptions for Patients Act to put an end to this anti-competitive practice that keeps drug prices artificially high. There are 2 practices in particular that this bill will address. One is called patent thicketing, which involves building layers upon layers of patents to prevent competitors from ever hitting the market. That's what AbbVie did with Humira. The company has had until just now with its monopoly ending, as many as 134 active patents for a single drug. 134 patents. Now, I'm a firm believer in the patent system. I believe we ought to protect investments made in cutting-edge and life-saving drugs, and we ought to reward those who invent these life-saving drugs with an exclusive right to sell it for a period of time. That's what the patent law does. and it incentivizes more and more people, more and more scientists and medical researchers to come up with new life-saving drugs. But getting 134 patents on the same drugs should outrage all of us. Like I said, this drug's been available for 20 years. AbbVie has spent years and exorbitant amounts of money, but apparently they've still profited. They've spent a lot of money fighting competition off in court, all to maintain control of the market on this drug. Like I said, patents and exclusivity periods are not inherently bad. Discovering new cures is a time, labor, and money-intensive process, and we don't want to discourage that. Before a company spends years and hundreds of millions or even billions of dollars researching a new cure, conducting clinical trials, and undergoing the regulatory review it needs to know that it can recoup its investment and maybe, just maybe, make a profit. And many of the new drugs that are invented and tried do not succeed. So success is certainly not guaranteed. That's why the United States offers robust protections for intellectual property through the patent system. The patent system gives innovators the confidence they need to invest their time and resources into research and development. Once that new innovative drug hits the market, the manufacturer can enjoy a limited time period as the sole supplier before generic versions become available or other competitors. Patents are the key behind the incredible medical innovation that occurs here in the United States. And we need to find the right balance between stopping bad actors who will game the system and at the same time encouraging the development of future cures. I believe the bipartisan bill that Senator Blumenthal and I are reintroducing strikes that balance. It places a reasonable limit on the number of patents that a manufacturer can contest. That will deter gamesmanship while preserving the incentives necessary for the patent system and for innovation. The other anti-competitive behavior this bill will address is something called patent hopping. Product hopping, which occurs when a company develops a reformulation of a product that's about to lose exclusivity and then pulls the original product off the market. This is done not because the new formula is more effective, but because it prevents generic competitors. One example is the drug Namenda, which is used by patients with Alzheimer's, a terrible disease. Near the end of the exclusivity period, the manufacturer switched from a twice-daily drug to a once-daily drug. Didn't change the basic molecules, it just changed the prescribed dosage and taking instead of twice a day to once a day. That move prevented pharmacists from being able to switch patients to a lower cost generic, even though it's just as effective, so the company could continue to profit. The Affordable Prescriptions for Patients Act puts an end to this practice by expressly prohibiting manufacturers from engaging in product hopping. It also facilitates market entry for generics and biosimilars, which lead to more options and lower prices for patients. These reforms are obviously desperately needed. Patients in Texas and across the country are experiencing sticker shock at the pharmacy counter like never before. Many have tried to ration their critical medications, for example, in order to make them last longer. Some have even been priced out of their medications entirely. There's a clear need for Congress to step in and address the blatant abuse of the patent system, and I'm optimistic that we'll be able to do something important about it. The Judiciary Committee will hold a markup next Thursday to consider this legislation and other bipartisan proposals to address sky-high drug prices. Last Congress, the Affordable Prescriptions for Patients Act passed the Judiciary Committee with unanimous bipartisan support, and I hope we'll see the same level of support this go-around. Over the last few years, we've held many hearings and advanced many drug pricing bills to the Senate floor, but unfortunately, progress seems to often end there. We haven't had much success in getting those bills through the House and signed into law. I think I can speak on behalf of colleagues on both sides of the aisle and say, I hope this year is different. I've heard from many Texans who are frustrated by the lack of lower-priced generic drugs. Given the impact of inflation on family budgets, that strain has only grown greater over the last few years. So there's a bipartisan desire to stop the anti-competitive behaviors that I've described here today that are costing patients and taxpayers a fortune. And I hope we can make progress this Congress and finally put a stop to some of the gamesmanship. Senator Blumenthal and I are committed to moving our bipartisan bill across the finish line, and we're eager to have others of our colleagues join us by co-sponsoring this bill. But more important than that, it's important we actually get it across the finish line, get it through the House, and get it to the President's desk. So I hope this bill will continue to receive broad bipartisan support, and I'm happy to work with anyone who has ideas to help us get there. Mr. President, I yield the floor. And I would note the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.